There is a cat asleep somewhere near you right now, maybe on a windowsill, maybe on your lap, maybe on the exact keyboard it was asked, politely, not to sit on. It looks completely at home. It looks like it owns the place. And in a strange sideways way, it does, because no one ever really invited it in. Here's the part that sounds like a joke, but is not. Nobody set out to make the house cat. No ancient human looked at a small, sharp-toothed wild predator and decided to redesign it as a pet. The cat curled up beside you was not planned in the way cattle, sheep, or modern dog breeds were planned. Your ancestors created the conditions for it. Then, something wild noticed the opportunity. To understand how, you have to go back farther than the first farms. About 14,500 years ago, hunter-gatherers in parts of the Levant began living for longer periods in large settlements. They still hunted and gathered wild food, but they were no longer moving constantly. Food scraps accumulated. Shelters remained standing. Seeds, nuts, and other supplies sat in the same place long enough for another species to discover a new way of life. Mice moved in. A 2020 study led by archaeozoologist Thomas Cucci traced ancient house mouse remains across southwestern Asia and Europe. The evidence showed that mice were already adapting to dense human settlements before full-scale agriculture began. Farming did not create the first human-loving mice from nothing. Permanent settlements opened the door. Grain cultivation, larger villages, and food storage later turned that opening into an enormous invitation. This is the first accident in the story. Your ancestors built a new ecological niche without knowing it. A niche is simply a way of making a living. Human settlements became a strange new habitat, full of shelter, waste, stored food, and fewer natural predators. The mice that tolerated people gained access to all of it. And wherever mice gather, something eventually follows them. Across North Africa and southwestern Asia lived the African wildcat, Felis libica. It was a lean, tawny hunter, close in size and appearance to many tabby cats alive today. Most wildcats avoided people. That made sense. Humans were loud, dangerous, and unpredictable. But not every wildcat reacted in exactly the same way. Picture the edge of an early settlement after sunset. Low houses, baskets, and storage pits. Smoke drifting above cooking fires. Mice slipping between walls. Beyond the light, a wildcat waits. It is not friendly. It does not want affection. It simply wants the small animals feeding on human supplies. A nervous wildcat keeps its distance and catches whatever the open landscape provides. A slightly calmer wildcat enters the settlement, eats more often, and raises more kittens. Some of those kittens inherit a little of that tolerance. Generation after generation, the animals best able to live near people gain an advantage. That is why cats are often said to have domesticated themselves. The phrase is useful, but it is incomplete. Humans did not begin by controlling every mating pair, yet people still shaped the process. They created the food-rich habitat. They tolerated useful hunters. They carried some cats to places those animals could never reach alone. Later, they protected, traded, managed, and eventually bred them. For years, the most famous genetic evidence seemed to place the beginning of this relationship neatly in the Fertile Crescent. In 2007, a team led by Carlos Driscoll compared DNA from domestic cats and wildcats across a huge region. The results linked house cats closely to Near Eastern populations of Felis libica. The timing also fit the rise of farming villages. Stored grain attracted mice. Mice attracted wildcats. Wildcats grew accustomed to humans. It was clean, logical, and easy to remember. There was also a remarkable piece of archaeological evidence from Cyprus. At the site of Chilurokambos, a team led by Jean-Denis Vigne uncovered a cat placed close to a human burial roughly 9,500 years ago. Wildcats were not native to Cyprus. Someone had transported cats across the sea, showing that humans were already moving them deliberately and forming close relationships with them. But that burial does not settle the entire history of the modern house cat. It shows that human-cat relationships were ancient. It does not prove that the Cyprus cat belonged to the exact population that later produced the cats living in homes around the world. Then, ancient DNA changed the map. In 2025, a large international team led by Marco De Martino analyzed ancient and modern cat genomes from archaeological material collected across Europe and Anatolia. The study found that domestic cats did not spread into Europe with the first Neolithic farmers, as the older story had suggested. Instead, the ancestors of modern European house cats arrived much later, around 2,000 years ago, probably from North Africa. The team also detected two different movements out of North Africa. One brought wildcats from the northwest of the continent to Sardinia more than 2,000 years ago. Their descendants became the island's present wildcat population. A separate North African lineage reached mainland Europe around the Roman period and became a major genetic foundation of European domestic cats. That does not mean every early connection between people and cats in the Near East was imaginary. Cyprus is still real. Early transported cats are still real. Wildcats may have entered human settlements in several places. What changed is the simple claim that today's domestic cats followed the first farmers directly from the Fertile Crescent into Europe. The origin story is now messier and more interesting. Scientists still cannot point to one village, one century, or one population and declare that the house cat began there. The latest evidence suggests that several regions and cultures within the African wildcat's natural range may have contributed. The Levant preserves some of the earliest evidence for cats living close to people. North Africa appears central to the lineage that later spread through Europe. Egypt may have been far more than a culture that simply admired an already finished pet. Consider what happened there. At Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt, archaeologists found 2 adult cats and 4 kittens buried in a human setting, dating to roughly 3700 BCE. Thousands of years later, cats became deeply woven into Egyptian homes, religion, art, and the cult of the goddess Bastet. Large numbers were bred, kept, sacrificed, and mummified. Those practices were not the beginning of every human-cat relationship, but they may have intensified one part of the process. Human settlements along the Nile offered grain, fish waste, rodents, shelter, and dense populations. Some cats became closely associated with people. Religious value may have encouraged humans to protect and reproduce particular groups. Trade then gave those cats a route outward. Now, picture a North African port around 2,000 years ago. Grain sacks fill a warehouse. Fishing waste collects near the water. Rats and mice move through ropes, baskets, and ship cargo. A small cat hunts between them. Sailors do not need to teach it how. They only need to notice that a ship with cats loses less food. A cat boards, perhaps deliberately, perhaps by following prey. The ship crosses the Mediterranean. The animal reaches a new port, then another town, then another ship. Trade networks become cat networks. An animal once tied to local human settlements begins traveling wherever humans carry food. This is where the accident becomes a partnership. Humans gained a quiet predator that controlled pests. Cats gained concentrated prey, protection from larger animals, warmth, and transport across deserts, seas, and eventually the world. Neither side needed a formal agreement. The arrangement worked because each species changed the environment of the other. Cats did change during domestication, just less dramatically than many other domestic animals. Their bodies still resemble wild cats closely, and domestic cats can still interbreed with wild populations. But their genomes carry signs of selection connected to behavior, fear, learning, and reward. The cat beside you is not simply an untouched wildcat. It is an animal shaped by thousands of years of living around human choices, even when those choices were indirect. That history also explains why a cat does not behave like a dog. Dogs experienced a different domestication path and were intensively selected for cooperation, communication, guarding, hunting, herding, and companionship. Cats were valued mainly because they already knew how to do the job humans needed. A good mouse hunter did not have to wait for instructions. It only had to tolerate people, return to the food-rich settlement, and keep hunting. So when your cat ignores a command, the animal is not failing at the role your ancestors created for it. Independence was part of the role. Your ancestors did not invent the wildcat. They did not control the entire process from the beginning. They built settlements, stored food, filled ports and ships with provisions, and accidentally created one of the most successful hunting grounds on Earth. Wildcats entered that world. Some stayed. Humans began carrying them farther. There is a cat asleep somewhere near you right now. It did not end up there because one ancient farmer decided to tame its ancestor beside a single grain store. It arrived through a much longer story. Settled hunter-gatherers and mice, early farmers and island voyages, North African towns, Egyptian beliefs, Mediterranean ships, and thousands of small decisions made by animals that were just calm enough to remain close. You did not create the cat on purpose. Your ancestors built a warm world full of food, and something wild walked in, found a place beside you, and quietly decided to stay.